Well, welcome again to this week's edition of Christian Answers. Happy that you can be along for the journey today. We're going to be talking about a television program, an interview that occurred this past week with Diane Sawyer of ABC News and Bruce Jenner, the former Olympian, the decathlon winner of 1976. He won the decathlon, and he was a participant in a couple of the Olympic Games, but the last one in 1976, he actually was the winner of the decathlon, and he became what was classified at the time the world's best athlete. So here we have a man who has a history of athletics and who 40-some years ago won the top male athlete category of the world, and he is being interviewed by Diane Sawyer in a 2-hour interview on television, prime time. And what is he going to be saying to Diane Sawyer that would attract so much attention? Well, what he's attempting to do is what they call transition from being a man into a woman. And if you're shocked at that, as I'm shocked at that, you should listen to this interview, because it is totally and utterly outrageous as to what he is describing and to what he is attempting to do with his life. He is 65 years old, I believe it is, and he is at the point of his life where he could look back and he could see some of his athletic accomplishments and be proud of that, but instead he is going in a disgraceful direction. He's going in a shameful direction, and as an American, I am offended by here is a U.S. Olympian representing this country, and now he is talking about he wants to transition himself into being a woman. And so what I'm going to talk about is how should a Christian respond to such a thing? Is there such a thing as transitioning from a male to a female, or vice versa, a female to a male? Well, our society today seems to think that that is a perfectly normal and natural thing that a person would want to do. Our society today is almost 100% accepting of what Bruce Jenner is proposing to do. The interviewer, Diane Sawyer, seems to be perfectly fine and affirming and encouraging him to do whatever it takes for him to be happy. And as a Christian, we have to ask ourselves, is this a legitimate thing to do? Is this something that is morally okay? You know, in the interview, Bruce Jenner says that he goes to church. He wonders if God looks down upon him with favor, and he knows the Bible, seemingly. He's quoted from the Bible a couple times in the interview. So he's familiar with God, he's familiar with the church, he's familiar with the Bible, and yet seemingly he is going a course contrary to the Bible. Or is it contrary to the Bible? Well, I want to talk about that today on today's episode of Christian Answers, and I want to provide a biblical framework for one understanding what is happening in our society. So what I want to do is go to a few verses in the Bible, and I want to talk about what God thinks about men and women, and how he created men and he created women, and what their gender and roles are in society. And we're going to look at some of the key passages that the Bible outlines as far as how we should think about this topic. You know, there are all kinds of directions that people go in life, but they're not always the correct direction. And today, more and more people are just following their emotions. They're following their feelings. If that feels good, do it. That came in on the 60s revolution. And people have almost taken that as a philosophy of life principle. If it feels good, do it. Well, Bruce Jenner evidently has convinced himself that he has to become physically looking like a woman because he feels that he is a woman trapped in a man's body, supposedly. So is that a legitimate option for people today, or is that something totally outside of the will of God? Well, we're going to look at that today. And the best place to look at this, is, I think, is the Bible. And what we want to do is go to Matthew, the 19th chapter, and we're going to listen to the words of Jesus. Jesus says in chapter 19, verses 4 and 6, he says in the Bible, "Haven't you read," he replied, "that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female, and he said, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh, so they are no longer two but one. Therefore what God has joined together, let no man separate." Now some of you have heard that scripture quoted at a wedding. It says, what God has joined together, let no man separate. But we don't often look at what Jesus actually said at the first part. He said, from the beginning, the Creator, that is God the Father, made them male and female. So that, in other words, it is God's created will and created order of nature that there be men and that there be women, male and female. And if God creates, and if God brings about the creation of a new person, they're either male or female. And if they're born male, they are a male. And if they're born female, they are a female. And so we see right here at the very beginning that God created male and female. Now, what Jesus is doing is he's actually quoting the book of Genesis. He's quoting the first chapter of Genesis, verse 27, where it says that God created them male and female, and then he's quoting the second chapter of Genesis, verse 24, where it says that a man will leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife. So we have heterosexual relationships all over the place here as the established created order. We see that there's a father and a mother. That is a heterosexual marriage. We also see that a man will leave his father and mother, the family, and be joined to his wife, that is a female, and the two will become one flesh. So we see right there, we see the definition of marriage is a man and a woman joined together. And we also see that God, in the beginning, the original purpose was to create male and female, man and woman. And so there is no third sex, and there is no confusion of the sexes. If God creates a man, if a man-child is born, that is a male. If a female baby is born, that is a female. And so that's the way God created it. Now today in modern society, there's this false view, this erroneous view that says that your gender is actually separate from your sex. You could be actually born into a female body, but you're actually a man gender-wise. And if you are born into a male body, you could actually be a female gender-wise. And so we have all of this massive confusion in society today because of this erroneous idea of separating sex and gender. And this is nowhere to be found in Scripture. In fact, it contradicts the Bible. God created them male and female. Male is their sex, and male is their gender. Female is their sex, and female is their gender. They're both the same. They go together. There is no separating of the sex of a person and the gender of a sex, which is gaining ground, this popular idea that those two are separated today. That's a false lie that is being perpetrated in our society today, and we need to be aware of it and be warned not to fall into that trap. Well, I want to talk about a second verse in the Bible that shows us how to think about this subject in just a second. Don't go away. We'll be back for part 2 of Christian Answers.